Welcome back, Sebastian here. So moving on to third in the constructors, McLaren. For McLaren, pretty happy with their start to the 2024 F1 season. It started a little bit slow, but last several races have definitely been highs for the team. So first, taking a look at their race-by-race results. In Bahrain, Norris 6th, Piastri in 8th. Moving on to Saudi Arabia, other way around, Piastri in 4th, Norris in 8th. Then we get to Australia, first podium of the season for McLaren. Norris getting a 3rd place, benefiting from Verstappen's brake failure. Piastri finished right behind him in 4th that race as well. Then we get to Japan, Norris 5th, Piastri 8th. A bit of a letdown in Japan. They thought they were going to be the 2nd fastest team that track, but they were actually 3rd behind Ferrari. Then we get to China, where things start to change. I know coming into the Chinese Grand Prix weekend, there was a lot of talk about how China was going to be such a terrible track for the team, but contrary to expectations, Norris comes in, finishes 2nd in the main Grand Prix. Piastri 8th, would have finished higher, but suffered damage from that collision, kind of as a byproduct of that collision between Ricciardo and Stroll. Then we get to Miami. Piastri has a great start, up in 2nd place for the first stint of the race, and then because through a bit of unluckiness with the safety car and then also with the contact with Sainz, ends up well outside the points in 13th, whereas his teammate, who is behind him at the start, actually ends up winning his maiden Grand Prix. So you can see basically the results have been getting better recently, but really they've been getting better for Norris and not so much for Piastri. And that you can really see that difference when you look at the differences in the teammate head-to-head. So for Norris, 83 points, but Piastri 41. Average finishing position 4.43 for Norris, Piastri 7.25. Average starting position 4.75 for Norris, and for Piastri 6.13. So about 1.5 positions roughly difference between the two, which is honestly not too bad. The finishing position difference though is much bigger, and obviously Piastri's result in Miami is gonna kind of weigh that down quite a bit. When we look at the qualifying head-to-head, 5-1 in favor of Norris, about the same as it was last year, but the actual gap between the pair of them has decreased. So after 6 races, the gap is 0.124 seconds, just over a tenth of a second, whereas last year, the average gap over the course of the whole season was 0.206, so about 2 tenths of a second. So Piastri has almost halved that gap in qualifying, so there is some good news there for Piastri. He does seem to be getting closer to Norris in qualifying trim. And I think really the trick for him will be figuring out a way to convert that pace in qualifying into the race pace. And I think then we'll see him be much closer and much more competitive with Norris on a Sunday. When we look at points above expected, you can really see the difference between, I think, both their kind of skill in a Grand Prix, as well as kind of the differences in luck that we've seen between the two of them, especially recently. So for Norris, points above expected, 19.48. For Piastri, negative 17.41. I believe both totals are the best and the worst respectively amongst the front-running teams. When you convert that into percentages, Norris 132% and Piastri 67%. And I believe Norris, that's the best total of anyone on the grid, really showing he's kind of really maximizing his Sunday performances based on where he's starting. Now, when we look at McLaren, the constructor, since the start of these ground effect rules, you can see that there's definitely a steady sign of progression. 2022, 159 points total that year. After the first quarter, though, 46 points. A bit of an up and down season. It was definitely a season where Norris really carried the team as Ricciardo really struggled, and they ended up finishing 5th in the constructors. Average pole gap 1.227 seconds, which was 4th, so they were actually faster than Alpine in that metric, but Alpine, 2 pretty solid drivers in Alonso and Ocon, definitely a better pairing than Norris and Ricciardo, because Ricciardo was weighing down the team so much that year. Then we get to 2023. Obviously it ended very well, 302 points at the end of the year, 4th in the constructors. But after the first quarter of the season, when I did this video about McLaren last year, they only had 14 points. It was an absolutely horrific start to the season, and in many respects in a very similar situation that Alpine is in right now, except I would say a bit worse, a bit further down the field. Anyway, yeah, so they ended up with their upgrade package that came in at Austria massive improvement, and they really carried that momentum all the way to the end of the year. Average pole gap at the end of the year was 0.791, so they took almost half a second off compared to 2022, but that average pole gap was fifth, so they were slower than Aston Martin over the course of the whole year. Of course, having Norris and Piastri, two very solid drivers, definitely better than the combination of Alonso and Stroll. Stroll really weighing Aston Martin down quite a bit last year. Now, into 2024, 124 points, definitely the best total they've had in this era over the first quarter of the season. They're sitting third in the Constructors, and realistically, I don't really see how they're going to fall out of that top three unless Aston Martin or Mercedes have some kind of massive upgrade in the coming races. Average pole gap 0.434, which is third. So they're basically sitting where they should be based on those pole gaps. And the pole gap, of course, has decreased from the average last year. Although if you probably took basically just the average from the second half of last year, it would probably honestly not be too dissimilar. But I think on one lap pace, they're definitely closer to Ferrari than they were last year. So for McLaren, it's a pretty exciting time, definitely a lot of upward momentum. And now there's even some talk about potentially even challenging for a championship next year. For 2024, I don't think it's really realistic. Red Bull, I think, is too far ahead. I think for them to really have any chance with the gap that Verstappen's already built up, I think McLaren would basically have to be the fastest car for the rest of the season. Or Verstappen would have to have like a very high amount of DNFs. He would have to have like 3 or 4 DNFs or so. And you need like Norris or Piastri, probably Norris, capitalizing on those days in a big way. So for McLaren, I think really goal for the rest of the season, perhaps challenge Ferrari for second in the championship. I think if everything goes right for them, that's still, I think, a possibility, and try to build a team up to be in the best possible position for 2025. Last year of the new regulations, of course, before we get the new engines in 2026. So there you go. There's my review of McLaren's first quarter of the 2024 F1 season. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. It always helps out. I'll see you again later. Bye-bye.